Okay, so we're going to work on vertical and horizontal lines today. So what we're going to start off with is a linear equation, just like the last couple of days we've been doing. So we're going to find at least 4 solutions to graph this linear equation. We have 1x plus 2y equals 5. So remember, when we want to find solutions, we choose numbers either for x or for y. It's our choice. We plug them in and we find the other values. So in our case, I'm going to actually choose values for y because the coefficient seems more complicated than the coefficient that's in front of x. So what I'm saying is this 2 seems more complicated than 1. So they asked me to find 4 solutions. So I'm going to make a little table for myself. X plus 2y equals 5y. Okay, so let's choose one solution together. Let's choose -1. And so I get x plus 2 times -1. That gets x minus 2 equals 5. Add 2 to both sides, so I know x equals 7. Okay, so I know one of my points is 7, -1. I'm going to come to my graph. I'm going to assume that these are all going to fit pretty well on our graph here. So I'm just going to put our x and y axis in the middle, like normally. Okay, and I'm going to plot this point. So 7, -1 would be right here. So what I want you to do is, we found one together. I want you to pause the video and I want you to find 3 more solutions. So do this 3 more times and then plot 3 more points and then put a line through your points. So if we zoom into my graph here, here are some of the points. Go ahead, if you need to pause the video to look at the points closely, go ahead and do that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the actual point of today. We're going to take a look at a different type of equation here. So in this equation, it looks a lot like the last one, except now it says 1x plus 0y equals 5. It still asks us to find 4 solutions to the graph of this linear equation. So we're still going to make a table. X, 1x plus 0y equals 5, and y. Okay, I'm going to ask that we choose values for y for this problem, and you'll see why in just a second. Here, -1, 0, 1, and 2. Or actually, let's change the last one to 5 or something like that. Okay, so now we're going to plug these in. And this may be a lot simpler than you're realizing at this moment. So if I plug in -1, then I get x plus a x plus 0 times -1 equals 5. And we should know that 0 times anything is 0, so that goes away. It's gone, okay? And we're left with what? We're left with x equals 5. Okay, so I'm going to put 5 here, and this gives me my point, 5, -1. Okay, I do the next one. If I plug in 0, well, I get x plus 0 times 0, and we should know right now that also goes away, equals 5. So that's weird. X equals 5 again. So my next point is 5 and 0. And then I'm going to do it again. I'm going to have x plus 0 times 1 equals 5. Anything times 0 is 0, so that's gone, which means that for us, x equals 5. So we get 5 and 1. And our next one, we're plugging in 5. So we get x plus 0 times 5 equals 5. Anything times 0 is 0, so that's gone. And we're left with just x equals 5. So that gives us our last point, 5, 5. Hopefully what you've noticed is that all of our x values ended up being 5, which is a pretty interesting thing that could happen to an equation, especially when we're used to getting a bunch of different answers like we saw in our graph over here. Okay, what I want you to do next is pause the video and go ahead and check, graph these points on the graph here. Okay, so if you take a look at what you graphed, if you graph this correctly on the coordinate grid, here are 4 points, here, 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 and here. And if we connect them with a line, you'll see that we end up with a line that's going straight up and down. Okay? This is called a vertical line. Whoops. It's called a vertical line. It's a line that goes straight up and down. Okay? So I want you to now, seeing that obviously these two equations gave us very different lines, I want you to take a look at the two equations side by side. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to write them down here in this next portion. So we had 1x plus 2y equals 5. And then the second equation was 1x plus 0y equals 5. And I want you to think about, what is it about these two equations? How is it different? And why did it create such a different change in our graph? Okay, so take a moment. You can pause the video, think and write. So hopefully you're back from thinking and writing about that, and I want to discuss this with you. Okay, so what we noticed that was different, I'm going to highlight this for us. What was different is that here I have 2 y's and here I have 0 y's. Okay, when I have 0 y's in my equation, what happens is that the y value becomes unimportant. So this means the y value doesn't matter. The y value does not matter anymore, because no matter what we do, whenever we plug something in there, just like we saw when we were solving it, every time I plug something in, it equals 0, right? So that means the y value doesn't actually matter to the rest of the equation. So it's kind of as if no matter what I plugged in, I knew x was always going to be 5. Okay? So the way that this changes to the graph is that x is going to stay 5 no matter what y is. So I'm going to take us back to look at the graph for a second. So if we're looking here, I want you to look specifically at the points that are on the pink line. And I want to talk to you about these points. So every point on this graph is pretty awesome, and I'm going to explain why. So if I take this point here, okay, this point is 5, 3. It's pretty awesome. Okay, this point up here at the top, that would be on the line if it was there, is 5, 9. Pretty awesome. Let's look at this point way at the bottom. This point right here is 5, negative 10. Okay, so all of these points are on this line, which means all of these points are solutions to that equation. And they're solutions to that equation because the only thing that matters in this coordinate pair is actually just x. As long as x is 5, this equation is going to be true because it's going to say 5 equals 5, which means that we have the freedom to let y be whatever we want. So in this line, we have a line where all the x values are 5, but the y values are changing. Okay? This is what we call a pretty special equation. I can come back to this equation and I can rewrite this equation. I know I don't need the y anymore. I can rewrite this equation as x equals 5. And I know this is going to be a vertical line at x equals 5.